culty in a way, okay? The Supreme Court's operating schedule and the way that they work, this is the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. It took them a while to get their own building, but they have one. What do you notice about this building and the architecture? It is very Greco-Roman. The colonnade here, and the columns, the Corinthian columns. In fact, it looks like a famous monument in Greece. Anybody know? The Parthenon. Hey, it's all right. It's one architecture or the other. All right. So it looks like the Parthenon. And you're going to find out that the Supreme Court treats this building and their whole atmosphere in a very religious, culty type of way. And attorneys and people associated with the court jokingly refer to this as the temple. Right? I know. And you're going to see that they definitely do some culty things. First of all, let's talk about this. Their schedule and ceremony. The Supreme Court, they got a great schedule. They only hear cases from October to June. That's a better schedule than y'all. Okay? They only hear cases from October to June. And they don't even make their announcements until much later on. Like the cases they're hearing now, you won't hear the announcements till June or July. So in the summer times when they issue, like to the public, their rulings. Yes?
Okay, so say you have to take a case to the Supreme Court in like the very beginning of July. Is that not going to start until October?
Yeah, they won't, like, if you appeal your case to the Supreme Court and they tell you they're going to accept it, it won't get scheduled. Like, if you do it in July, it won't get scheduled till at least October.
Like in jail, trying to appeal like your ruling.
Suck it up and wait. Yeah. I know. It'd be pretty bad, huh? All right. Their schedule's pretty great. Jackson?
So let's say one of them dies during the upcoming
Mm-hmm.
they don't have the set. So how does that work? Like, do they
You just keep on chugging away, man. We'll talk about what happens if there's a tie vote, too. Okay? I know, that's awkward. Now, the Supreme Court, their 2-week interval schedule, let me show you something here. If you go to their website, which is pretty awesome, right? They have their schedule up for what's going to be in the next few months. And so this is the schedule they got right now. They work on 2-week intervals. The next 2 weeks coming up are off weeks. The days that they're on, these red days, are argument days where they're hearing cases. Okay? So, like this week and the last week, they heard cases and they're going to talk about them and do some research in these 2 off weeks here. Okay? So, the argument days, though, you can look like on the 19th, you can click on it and it'll tell you the building is closed, but they still have arguments. Here's the cases that they've got scheduled for today. Like they're only going to hear 3 cases today. Okay? The 20th, they're only going to hear 2 cases. I know. People are like United States versus Gary. Why do they find that funny? It's like, hey, Gary, that's the guy's last name. Now, when you look at this, like Greer versus the United States, you can look at the information and the history of the case so far and the questions presented, right? Like, for example, this has to do with a defendant possessing a firearm, right? The question presented, whether applying the plain view, this deals with searches and seizures, right? So that's a case that the Supreme Court's going to have to handle. City of San Antonio versus Hotels.com. It's really boring. We looked it up last month, and it was about taxes. Gary, United States versus Gary. Let's see what Gary's complaining about. Who pled guilty to possessing a firearm as a felon. This is similar to, but not the same as the other case. So you've got all these cases, and you can look up what's on their schedule for the upcoming weeks and even into May. And then it's like, oh, June, they're just hanging out at that point. They've still got work to do, but by and large, they're only going to hear arguments for certain schedules or certain time frames throughout the month. March, like I said, yesterday, the last 2 weeks, they've been hearing cases. And during those 2 weeks off, though, they're doing research on similar cases. They're discussing things with their colleagues. The justices also have law clerks that work for them that help inform them about various issues. So don't think that they're completely off, but they do get a really nice schedule. Fun fact here at the Supreme Court, too, within that building I showed you, they also have a special little gym for them to stay healthy and in shape there. They do have a basketball court, and they've only got 9, though, so it's like you got to find, somebody else to play a pickup game if you want that.
I would love to see a Supreme Court justice poster another Supreme Court justice.
That would be entertaining. Ruth Bader Ginsburg posthumously dunking on somebody would be fantastic. All right. Now, we'll talk about this, but the neat thing about the Supreme Court, they're very transparent with everything that they do. You can listen to argument audio, like the cases today, they'll post the audio from the attorney's arguments. So you can listen in. In fact, when you go, like, here's what the Supreme Court says, there's a gallery, and under non-COVID circumstances, you can go and sit. As long as you're quiet and you don't interrupt things, you're welcome to go and sit in the Supreme Court and listen to cases being heard, which is kind of entertaining in a way. All right. Also, they have transcripts if you want to read those, and we'll talk about. They have they put lists of their rulings and official writings about their cases and why they decided the way that they did. So they're very, in that regard, they are very transparent.
So of all the cases we've seen before, they come up with that ruling in like 2 weeks or no?
What they do is, well, hold that thought, because we're going to show you about the process. Now, in the Supreme Court, one of the justices is the Chief Justice. It's this guy right here, but most people don't know who he is, even if he walked down the street and bopped them on the head. Hey, Dylan, you know who this guy is? That is Chief Justice John Roberts. Okay? You know. Other people, you're like, I don't know. He looks like a nice guy. He's like, hold on, everybody. Okay? John Roberts, as Chief Justice, we'll talk about his importance in a minute here. He gets to determine a lot of things. And the role of Chief Justice, there's a phrase they use to describe him. He's first among equals. Okay? He doesn't get any more votes when it comes to deciding cases, but he is an important guy, and we'll talk about that importance in just a second. So hold that thought with us. Let's talk about how your case gets to the court. If you lose at a lower court level, at the Circuit Court of Appeals or through the state system, you can appeal to the Supreme Court. And when you appeal to the Supreme Court, you're asking for what's called a writ of certiorari. That is a fancy way of saying written permission to have your case heard. You'll see something like this. You send in a petition. It says it's a petition for a writ of certiorari. They're just saying, will you please grant us permission to have our case in front of the Supreme Court? A lot of times they'll just say you've been granted cert. Okay? I always think of cert, sounds like certification. Right? So you have to send a document to the Supreme Court saying, will you hear my case? Okay? Very few cases get heard in front of the Supreme Court. How many cases do you think they hear a year? Somewhere in the neighborhood of, in a busy year, 80 to 90. If it gets over triple digits, that's a lot. Okay? But 80 to 90 cases a year. See, this job's getting better all the time. You just schedule a couple cases every few days. You know, not a big deal. Very low numbers. Now, for the Supreme Court to grant cert, they use what's called the Rule of 4. 4 justices have to agree that your case is worthy to be heard in front of the court. You got to have 4 out of the 9. They don't have to agree on which side they think is right. They just have to say, we think we should hear this argument. They turn down most of the appeals for a writ of certiorari. Okay? They get 10,000 or more appeals every year. And they're only taking like 80 to 90 cases. It's less than 1%. Okay, can you imagine what we could do in schools if we turned away everybody we didn't want? Yes?
So, I'm trying to think back to like the Gary, where it's just like a felon having a firearm. How is that more important than probably, 1,000 other ones just exactly?
That's a really good question. Okay, and the answer is this. That case that we looked at, that Gary case, presents something that the court has never determined before. Like for example, if there was an issue, like let's say that Jada gets angry because I write her up for, she randomly in the middle of class, she stands up and starts yelling about how taxation is theft. Okay? Or eat the rich. Other little phrases like that. And she's like, Mr. Scalise, you can't punish me. The school can't punish me because I have freedom of speech. All right? The Supreme Court's not going to hear that case because lower courts are going to decide it. And the Supreme Court will be like, look, we have addressed free speech in schools so many times that this is an easy one. All right? The lower courts got it right. Whew, go away. That's why. Okay? Now, if it was something unique, like, for example, I think it was 2013, this kid in Alaska, You know how they have the Olympic torch running through? Bong hits for Jesus guy. Yeah, you guys remember. Like that presented an interesting case. Like, can the school punish them for something that was inherently not part of the academic routine? Yeah.
Would they hear a case possibly if like if they've heard that type of thing before, but the court below them they know that they didn't follow the ruling?
Yes. If they feel like some of the procedures weren't followed correctly, then yeah, they can hear the case. But usually they have to have something that piques their interest that is unique about that case. Okay? So ultimately, the rule of four. And some justices are kind of wonky about what they want to hear. But the idea is that, look, if four justices agree that it's worth hearing, then we should probably hear them out. Okay? Once you get granted a writ of certiorari, they schedule you for oral arguments. And you get scheduled it's way off in the distance. Like right now, if you had a case and you appealed, and let's say the court granted you cert, okay, they're like, hey, it's the end of our term right now. We're not going to be able to hear this until October. So they're going to pencil you in for October, okay? Now, before you ever go in October, you're going to have to send in what we call a legal brief ahead of time, okay? A legal brief is simply, you're just sending in a summary of your case, okay? So the justices can kind of prepare. You got to send in a legal brief. Ironically, they call it a brief, but it's not very brief. Briefs are like 30, 40 pages. Right? So if there's a controversy, let's say the United States versus Jackson Sholtis, okay, let's say that they discriminate against him getting into the Naval Academy. They're like, sir, you're too tall, okay? And he said, you're unfairly discriminating against me. You're violating the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause, right? And the Supreme Court's going to get this case. We have to send in a legal brief ahead of time, right, summarizing our argument. Now, you can also send what are called third-party briefs or amicus curiae briefs. We mentioned those earlier in the year, where parties other than the United States or Jackson Sholtis could send in a note to the court saying, hey, here's who we think you should side with. Right? And for example, the local veterans group might send in a amicus curiae brief on behalf of Jackson and be like, this is not how the military conducts itself. The Naval Academy should accept Jackson Sholtis. There's never been a height requirement before. They're unfairly discriminating against this tall young man. Okay? So you get third-party briefs. Like, for example, in the court case about the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, insurance companies, hospitals, healthcare groups were all sending in amicus briefs telling the court, here's what we think you should decide. It's exactly what the Supreme Court needs. Somebody telling them what they think they should do.
Do they ever take them into account seriously?
Yes, they do. Some more than others, okay? Some people take the amicus briefs, and what they usually do, every justice gets 4 law clerks, and if I'm a justice and I get a bunch of amicus briefs, I give them to my law clerks and say, find something interesting in here, okay? And if there's a good argument to be made, you'll take into consideration, yes.
Are there any restrictions about justices being able to take, I don't want to say bribes, but like bribes from like businesses and stuff that's in third-party briefs?
Yes, Supreme Court justices, like other federal judges, can be impeached. And bribery, one of the impeachable offenses.
Judges are really like iffy about that kind of stuff. Like they don't like what do they call gratuity?
Yes.
They don't like that kind of stuff.
Because it could make you look biased. Okay? So when you send in your legal brief ahead of time, you're preparing the justice because the justices want to know what questions to ask you. And when you get to the Supreme Court, you're going to face this weird atmosphere like this. All right? When you go in, your attorney is going to get to give their argument. And the attorney stands right here at this little lectern in the middle. And the justices are all sitting up here behind this bench with the giant ionic columns, the big red curtains, the giant clock. I know, and it's meant to be kind of intimidating. The justices have level. They're up here, and you're down here, right? And a fun fact, in education classes in college, they tell teachers that that's important. When you are teaching kids something directly and you need them to focus on you, you're standing up, they're sitting down, right? When you want them to focus on something else, it's not necessarily good to be hovering around the room because they're going to wonder what you're up to, right? You're establishing level. I'm up here, I'm important, right? And you guys are like, that's really annoying. It's all part of the cult. And also, too, what are the judges all wearing? Black robes, right? Tell me this is not a cult.
The only thing that'd make it worse is if they had hoods on.
That's great. I know. Now, when you get up here to give your argument, your attorney gets up to give their argument, they have very limited time. You get 30 minutes to make your case. You get 30 minutes to make your case. Each side will have 30 minutes. Now, what's really interesting, I had a professor who had some experience in front of the Supreme Court, and he said, you get 30 minutes to make your case, but you have to be prepared to give your whole argument in 15. And I was like, why is that? And he said, the justices pepper you with questions. Like, they're like, oh, well, hypothetically, if we rule in your favor, then what would that do in similar situations like this? If we rule in your favor, how would this happen? It's kind of like what I do to you all during journal questions, right? Now, some justices are very, very chatty, okay? John Roberts, the Chief Justice, he asked a lot of questions. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when she was alive, asked a lot of questions, right? Clarence Thomas, who's been on the court since 1992, does not ask a lot of questions. In fact, there was a 15-year gap between his questions one time, right? Now, here's the thing, though. When he broke the 15-year silence, like people reported on it, and it turned out he just told a joke. And it's like, what, bro? You've been silent for 15 years, and that's how you break your silence? And he just made like this offhand remark about something the attorney said, and the justices got a chuckle out of it, and they're like, Clarence Thomas speaks. You know? So, yeah, it's like he talks for real. And that doesn't mean, and like that makes some people nervous when you don't say anything because you're like, what is that person thinking? I don't know how they're taking this. All right. So you get 30 minutes. Your opponent, the other side, gets 30 minutes as well. And you got to be able to work fast. And it's an intimidating environment. Some of you all, I know that you're like, I'm not really talking during the journal questions because I'm afraid you'll ask me something and it terrifies me. How many of you are like, I don't like being the center of attention? Oh, yeah. And Sid's like, I don't want to be the center of attention. I don't want the focus on me, right? Don't argue in front of the Supreme Court then. Okay? So this is a pretty crazy environment. And also notice you got these huge vaulted ceilings as well. This place is meant to intimidate. Going into the chambers, they even have these giant, like, golden-looking doors. They're like 10 feet tall. I swear, you're going to see the Wizard of Oz. Okay? Now, you get this time frame to hear these arguments, and the justices are only going to hear like a couple cases a day. Like, wow, just hanging out the rest of the time. No, right? Once the justices hear arguments, they're going to go into what's called conferencing. Conferencing means they're going to discuss the case. Conferencing means they're going to discuss the case, and all the conferencing goes on in this conference room. This is great. We're going to add to the cultiness now. Okay? It does. You're like, I'm pretty sure somebody's about to die. Okay? The conference room, first of all, when you notice there's only one picture that adorns the wall, the great Chief Justice John Marshall, right? Because we have to worship John, right? That's how his friends know. Oh, yeah. All right. Now, also, when you come in, the justices, they do the handshake tradition. They shake hands with every other justice. Why? Why? Why do they need to have a sign of respect for each other? And what are they about to do? They're about to argue over cases. So they want to remind one another that we're still colleagues, we're still friends, and believe it or not, the 9 justices do develop kind of a camaraderie, like a friendship. And this is part of maintaining that. Okay? Hold on. Okay? Now, when you go in here, okay, there's no secretaries, there's no notes taken. Completely secretive. This is like skull and bone stuff. And the seating at the table. The Chief Justice gets to sit here at the head. This next senior-most justice is here at the opposite end. Then you get the 3 oldest justices there, and then the 4 new guys. All right? And every time somebody retires or dies on the court, you get to move up. Fun fact, whoever the new guy is, the newest justice, which right now it's Amy Coney Barrett, she's got to be the keeper of the door. So like somebody knocks on the door, she's the one that has to get up to go get it. The Supreme Court hazes. Look, it's about to get cultier, okay? When they sit down and have conferences about the cases, Everybody gets a chance to talk about the case, but who gets to talk first? Chief Justice talks first about the case, and then they go in order of seniority all the way down to new guy. And by the time you get to new guy, what's happened? Everybody said what they want to say, and they brought up all the relevant points. Okay? Every now and again, you might get lucky. It's like you all, like, you ever had a moment in a class where you were going to say something really smart, and the teacher calls on somebody else right beside you, and that's what they said. And then the teacher's like, what did you have to say? And you're like, same. And you're like, oh, okay. All right. So you are going to conference about the case. You bring out the pros and cons. And then once everybody's had an opportunity to share their thoughts on the case, then they're going to take a vote. Ooh. All right. Who votes first? No. New guy votes first, and they go in ascending order. All right. Because if it's tied at the end, who gets to be the tiebreaker? The chief. It's all about the chief. Yes. Good question. The answer is this. Whenever there's a vacancy for the Chief Justice, the president can either pick one of the remaining justices to be elevated to chief, or he can pick a brand new person to become chief. And a lot of times you pick a brand new person because that'll be your boy. Yes. Like when the last Chief Justice, William Rehnquist, died in 2005, Bush picked John Roberts, and he said, I'm going to make him the chief because that's my guy, and he's going to be around for a long time. And being the chief's important because you get to say what's important here. You get to dictate or cast any tie-breaking votes that might be on the court. And believe me, John Roberts has had an immense influence on the court. Okay? So everybody gets a chance to vote. No, not as much as you think. You have to remember, these people, when they take this job and they get a lifetime appointment, they're doing this as really an act of service. You know, the idea is that you check your ego at the door. And I'm sure to some extent, like the people who were on the court, the old dogs, would have liked to have become the Chief Justice, but you understand that's part of the game. Does that make sense? Like, for example, teachers even. When a teacher does something really well and they do, like, they get an award or something, like, I don't want to go around and be like, well, why didn't I get an award? All right, I want to be like, you know what, I'm happy for them. They're a great part of the team. And that's hard to do, okay? So ultimately, it's why it's also important you pick good people that can set aside their own egos. All right. Now, once you've voted on the case, okay, the next thing the court does is that they're going to make a written decision on the case. This is what I love about the Supreme Court. Every time they decide a case, they issue what's called an opinion of the court. It's a written explanation about why they did what they did. Here's why we voted in favor of this group, and this party in this case. An official opinion of the court. Ooh. All right. They are open to the public. You can read any Supreme Court opinion that's ever been published. Some of them are lengthier than others. Some of them are only a few pages, and some of them are like 50 pages. Okay? Now, here's the thing about it. Do you think that justices want to write the opinions of the court or not? Oh, they definitely want to write them. See, you all see writing as a punishment. Why, if you're on the Supreme Court, why do you want to write the opinion of the court? Hold that thought. What do you think? Or you gonna say something? This is the official interpretation of the Constitution and the law. You're getting to write it. That's pretty important. Okay? You're leaving a legacy on the country. You're deciding how free speech will be interpreted for years to come. You want to write opinions on the court. All right? And you guys are like, no, God, no, I can't imagine writing a 20 to 30 page paper every time a case comes up. Great question. Assigning opinions. Here's how it works. If the chief is in the majority, he will assign the opinion. Okay? Some chiefs are very selfish. John Marshall, he wrote most of the opinions from his cases because he's like, it's important, and I'm going to be the one to do it because I'm going to get it right. All right? Some of them are kind of selfish like that. John Roberts is more democratic. Okay? John Roberts has a policy that he tries to get everybody a chance to write an opinion of the court before anybody gets to write a second one that term, that year. Okay? Because he wants to share the love. He's like, you're a member of the Supreme Court. I don't want to freeze you out. Chloe, you get to write the next opinion. I know. Okay? And also, it depends on your specialty, too. Like, for example, let's say we're dealing with a case that has to do with tax law, and Brennan's a tax expert. Well, you know what? It's probably his words that should deal with this. Let's say there's an equal protection case, and Jackson's like, I know discrimination as the oppressed white male. All right? So ultimately, it depends on that, but you try to spread the love. Now, if the chief is not in the majority, like let's say it's a 7-2 decision, and one of the two dissenters is the chief, the senior most justice in the majority will assign the opinion. Okay? And it's a big deal. All right? Now, also, justices, if you're in the minority, like let's say it's a 7-2 decision and you're one of the two, you have the option to write what's called a dissenting opinion. Okay? And that's you saying, here's why I disagree with the other members of the court. You get to say, here's why I disagree.
Does that happen often?
Oh, yeah. Almost every case, as long as there's like at least one person dissenting, then those people write dissenting opinions. Right? The reason you do that, when you write a dissenting opinion, you're writing for posterity, for future generations, in the hopes that somebody can use that as a legal argument so that similar cases in the future will be decided differently. Here's an example. In 1897, Plessy versus Ferguson, it was an 8-1 decision that said you could separate people by race as long as you provided equal facilities. The one person who did not rule in that favor was John Marshall Harlan, known as the Great Dissenter. And he wrote a dissenting opinion saying the Constitution is and ought to be colorblind, and that ultimately by segregating people, you're implying that they are unequal. And 50 years later, in Brown versus Board of Education, they were like, you know what? Here's a good foundation for our argument. Okay? So when you write dissenting opinions, you're doing it for future generations. Sir?
So let's say the Supreme Court just like, back in 1865, right? They do like a super racist decision.
Like Dred Scott.
Exactly. And then like nowadays they're like, that was like really wrong. Like, can you just change the interpretation of how they interpret it?
No, you have to wait till a controversy arises. Okay? And that's one thing about the court. They don't go looking for controversies. You have to bring the controversy to them. Okay? And they don't change like the Supreme Court now doesn't look back in Dred Scott and be like, we're going to tweak that. You don't do that. But if somebody brought the issue before today, they would make a different decision today based on a lot that's changed. All right? It's a good place for us to pick up. We got like a minute left.